spring break number 2. So I was just saying, so we're not meeting next week. My classes are not meeting next week either because I'm going to be in Georgia. My son is graduating from officers training school. He just got done with the tank driving, so I got to see video of him driving a tank around and shooting the big gun. And, oh, yes. Thank you.
Is this like police officer?
No, it's military. He's a second lieutenant. So he did ROTC in college, and then he was commissioned to second lieutenant, and then they send him to Fort Benning, and he trains. So he's in the armor division. So he's had he went in October. So he's had months of training, and then they have 4 phases, and they have to pass them. Then he's got 2 more trainings, and then he got into Ranger School, and then he will go to Ranger School to become an Army Ranger, unless he flunks out, which he's like, people do. It's not the end of the world. It is tough. Yeah. So that doesn't start till August, but between now and then he has more. But anyway, we're going to see the ceremony. Yes, sir.
There's like first lieutenant, second lieutenant, third lieutenant. How did
I think second lieutenant is the bottom of the barrel. Like that's the starting. And then you work your way up from there. So he and all his cohorts are there the as low as you can be and be an officer. But you got to start somewhere, right? But you're an officer. You're better than yes, you're above everybody who's enlisted. So anyway, I'll have to bring a picture or something. So go ahead. Mm.
They both started in the Army at the same time, so my dad was saying,
oh, mm-hmm.
And at this speech, they were like, we never expected that this person would get this, and my mom was like, no, we all need to do that.
Okay, Art of the Week is something a little different. I'm going to pass this around so you can see it up close. This is a grave monument. This is actually a tombstone. And it is from probably around the year 400 BC. So just to put it in context, Socrates died in 399. So this is right around the same time. And this is known as I'm probably going to botch how to pronounce this, but the Hegeso grave stele. Hegeso is the name of the girl. She was a young woman. She is the deceased. All right, this is her grave monument. And up above it says she's Hegeso, daughter of Proxenos. That's her dad. We don't know who her mother is. And this is outside. There are various cemeteries. There's a very large, it's called the Kerameikos Cemetery in Athens. And you can walk through it. My son and I walked through it. It's just rows and rows of hills of different grave monuments and things, many of which are broken down. You can't really read them very well. I don't know if it's in that district or not that they found this. But so I'm going to just now read to you some things out of the art history book that I thought were interesting. All right, so this is not me being smart. This is just me reading words in front of my face. When they had gravestones for men, they generally showed the men in a military context or exercising, that they're working out. But as we've talked about, these things were not open to women in Greece. This was not a world in which they moved. They were at home. And scholars like to argue about whether or not women were allowed out to come to the plays, for the festival of Dionysus and see Medea and Oedipus and all these things. They certainly wouldn't go out and about without a male companion, overseer, either a father or a brother or a husband. That just was not an option. So Hegeso is at home. She's in her quarters and she's going through a jewelry box. Her slave girl, her servant girl, is bringing her jewelry box and she's picking up a necklace and and examining the jewelry. What am I going to wear today? This reminds us of something else too. These societies that we're reading about were built on slave labor. All right. Now, this is kind of controversial. The slaves get a bad rap, okay? I don't mean I think we should have slavery. I mean that every time we talk about slavery, it is colored by American slavery. Slavery has existed in pretty much every civilization we know of. Everybody has had slaves. They were not always based on skin color. They were more often based on, we conquered you in war. Remember all the times in Thucydides? And they killed the men and sold the women and children as slaves, right? That's the thing, that's the refrain. And we kill the men and we sell the women and children. That's how you end up with slaves. This slave could be a fellow Greek. Think about it. It's like Peoria goes to war with Indianapolis, and then we bring back Indianapolitan slave girls. Indianapolitan. Indianapolitan. I don't know how to make something belong to Indianapolis. I should have picked a better city. So she's looking at her jewelry, but she's got two possessions in front of her. She's got her jewelry, she's got a human being is also a possession of hers. I know. And the last thing is, I thought this was poignant, the art book mentioned. So her dad, she's young, we're assuming her dad is outliving her. He set this up. We don't know this for a fact, but the fact that he put his name on it, you know what I mean, that it's this woman, daughter of this guy, kind of leads us to believe that. And it makes you wonder, would this jewelry box have held part of the dowry that would have gone to her at her wedding that never happened? Because she died. Anyway, Alex, can you take it, pass it around so you can see it better? It is kind of sad, and this is why I really get into looking at stuff like that. It reminds me, these people are just like me. They dress different and they eat different food, but you're just as sad when your daughter dies. That doesn't change. You're just as upset when your city gets conquered. Like we think, oh, and they were sold as slaves. Oh, sucks to be them. That's too bad for them. How would you feel? Can you imagine? It's not like they were acclimated to it. I mean, maybe they were because this sort of thing happened. It would be a shock to our systems to be all enslaved. It would. We're just not, that doesn't happen. But they felt about it the same way we would feel about it. Their daughter dies and she's young and they feel the same as we feel. Because people's feelings don't really change. It's a cool thing to remember, but it's sad. Because you read about these terrible things and it's so far away. It's so long, long ago in a galaxy far, far away this happened. But they feel the same about it. It's terrible, it's tragic, and it's horrifying to lose your child, whether you live now or 2,500 years ago. So anyway, thank you for letting me pontificate on that. We are finishing a paper over the next 2 weeks. All right? It is the paper that hopefully you did some brainstorming on, comparing Socrates to Christ. As you read through the Republic, other things might pop into your head, and you can certainly add to that. But are we all okay with the format of what we're doing? We have 5 paragraphs, and we have an introduction and a conclusion, and then basically the 3 middle paragraphs, you are going to tell me a way that you think Socrates and Christ are the same or different. And then expound on that way. Don't just write one sentence. Neither of them wrote anything down. Great, well, then how do we know what they said? Tell me something about that. What sort of people were the ones writing down what they said? How did these writings get transmitted to us? Why have they not been lost over the years? Do you see how you're expounding on that? That's what I want you to work on. Please don't be illiterate, but do alliterate. And we're doing both kinds of parallelism and antithesis. We're not adding anything new. I think maybe we'll add something new on the next paper or something, just because we haven't in a while. We are almost done. I think we only have 1 or 2 more papers at all. Maybe it's just 1, because we only have 5 weeks after we come back. Well, we could crank out 2 papers in 5 weeks. Go ahead and get your reading questions open to our first segment of the Republic. But when I read the first book, I was reminded of something. Couldn't remember which one it was. It was one of the Psalms. So I looked it up. And I'm going to read a psalm to you. Because as you discovered, hopefully you discovered, Socrates is going to have a very, very long discussion about what is justice. And some people, we'll talk about this in a minute, argue that justice is just whatever the strong people can do. Or, that obviously unjust people are much better off than just people. Because, if I cheat at cards, I'm going to win more than you. I'm going to be better off than you. And Socrates wants to know if that's really true. Yes, Ethan?
What's that name, like,
Thrasymachus.
Yeah, it's so hard.
Oh, I know. He was ticked off too, wasn't he? Okay, so I may not read this whole psalm, but I'm going to start at the beginning, and I'll tell you, if I break off, I will tell you, okay? This is Psalm 73. Truly God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet I'd almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. For I was envious of the boastful when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For there are no pangs in their death, but their strength is firm. They are not in trouble as other men, nor are they plagued like other men. Therefore pride serves as their necklace. Violence covers them like a garment. Their eyes bulge with abundance. They have more than heart could wish. They scoff and speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens, and their tongue walks through the earth. Therefore his people return here, and waters of a full cup are drained by them. And they say, how does God know? And is there knowledge in the Most High? Behold, these are the ungodly, who are always at ease. They increase in riches. Surely I have cleansed my heart in vain, and washed my hands in innocence. For all day long I have been plagued, and chastened every morning. If I had said, I will speak thus, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. When I thought how to understand this, it was too painful for me, until I went into the sanctuary of God. Then I understood their end. Surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Oh, how they are brought to desolation is in a moment. They are utterly consumed with terrors. As a dream when one awakes, so, Lord, when you awake, you shall despise their image. Thus my heart was grieved, and I was vexed in my mind. I was so foolish and ignorant. I was like a beast before you. Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You hold me by my right hand. Okay, there's about 5 more verses, but I'm going to stop there because the psalmist feels the same. The unjust live better. Look at all these jokers. They do whatever they want. They don't care. And they say, does God even see? Nobody sees. Nobody's going to do anything. And of course, Christians have a unique perspective, don't we? Because this life isn't all there is. Something's coming. And these people, even if they die, even on their deathbed, they are wicked, godless, but filthy rich and have every amenity money can buy. They're not taking any of that with them, are they? Now, the Greeks did not have that perspective, right? They did not know the true God, but Socrates, we've talked about this before, suspects, more than suspects. He was staking his happiness on the fact that his soul was going to outlive his death. There, on his deathbed, literally on his deathbed, he was saying, part of me is going to live. I'm going to go somewhere better. I really believe that's true. But in the Republic, we have the same problem. It seems like the wicked people get ahead, and the good people fall behind, and they don't get the glory that they deserve, that they seem to deserve. And what do we do about that? Not what do we actively do. What do we think about that? What do we do with that fact in our own minds? This is what's happening in the Republic. What do we do with the fact that justice doesn't always seem to get you ahead? At least that's where we are in Book 1. So they go down to the Piraeus, the harbor, through the long walls, and because there's going to be a religious festival. And they end up at the house of Cephalus, right? He is a merchant. He lives down there in the harbor because he's a importer-exporter type, and he could be down there with things come and go. And they start out kind of weirdly. They start out by asking Cephalus, how's old age treating you? How you like being old? Is it okay? Do you mind? What's it like? And they have a little discussion about, it's not so bad to be old. My sense of taste diminishes. My desires for, all the pleasures of the body diminish. But those can sort of be taskmasters. You can end up being slaves to those things, to your physical appetites. It's not so bad to have those sort of wane. And then you can keep, a more even keel of life. And then they ask him, well, what about wealth? Does wealth help? Because you're a pretty wealthy man, Cephalus. Would you rather be old and rich or old and poor? And what does Cephalus say? How does being wealthy kind of cushion old age? What do you say, Matthew?
It helps people bear old age. It keeps us from doing the unjust actions that are sometimes committed by the poor.
Ah, and suddenly justice and injustice rears its head, right? And this is not to imply that every poor person will go out and be a thief because they're in need, but if you're desperate, you might be tempted to do desperate things to get by. If you're wealthy, you don't need to. Cephalus also says something else. I'm on page 5. Oh, this is paragraph E. Socrates, that when someone thinks his end is near, he becomes frightened and concerned about things he didn't fear before. It's then that the stories we're told about Hades, about how people who've been unjust here must pay the penalty there, stories we used to make fun of, twist his soul this way and that for fear they're true. And whether because of the weakness of old age, or because he is now closer to what happens in Hades and has a clearer view of it, or whatever it is, he is filled with foreboding and fear, and he examines himself to see whether he has been unjust to anyone. The closer you get to death, the more you start thinking about what happens after you die. And rightfully so. And maybe I need to take a good hard look at myself and see if there's anything I want to clean up. What? Oh, that was page 5 that I just read. It was the middle of, it was paragraph E, most of paragraph E. They start talking about justice. And I'm missing just a second. And the first thing they say, Cephalus starts this out. He ditches the argument very quickly and goes to offer sacrifices to the gods, and his son takes over. But he says, well, I think that justice is just giving to people what you owe them and telling the truth. That's justice. What little snag in that definition pops up? Do you remember? I give to everybody what is theirs, what is owed them. Do you remember? Matthew, you want to say it? Not really.
Well, if you're talking about giving people what they're owed, what if you gave a weapon?
Yes, this is the one.
If you borrowed a weapon from someone who is deranged, well, they weren't deranged and they got it and then they became deranged. Well, you technically owe them the weapon back, But no one's going to give a weapon to a deranged person.
In fact, we would think to do it would be unjust because they're going to harm themselves or someone else with it. Or a modern example, you know, you have a friend and they're a drug addict and they're trying to get, you know, clean, whatever. And they put you in charge of their money. They deposit their money with you, right? This is voluntary. You haven't stolen their money. They've basically lent you for safekeeping their money. Then they come, give me $100. I have to have $100 right now. And you know it. You're not going to give them the $100. Like, no, what do you want? If you're hungry, we'll go get some food. I know why you want the $100. I'm not giving you the $100. Because it would be unkind to do so if you think they're just going to go get high on it, right? And we would not be giving them what was theirs. That money is theirs. But it'd still be just. So Socrates doesn't like this definition. You know, Socrates doesn't like a lot of definitions, does he? They're like, no, that won't work.
It's really hard to find the true definition of something when someone's talking to Socrates, because that person will usually just like run away.
Yes. Or they will behave like Ethan mentioned Thrasymachus. Okay, this is page 12. This is so funny. I'm sorry. While we were speaking, because they go back and forth, they discuss this, oh, should we give to what is owed? What do you think the poets meant by that? While we were speaking, this is paragraph B, Thrasymachus had tried many times to take over the discussion, but was restrained by those sitting near him, who wanted to hear our argument to the end. When we paused after what I just said, however, he couldn't keep quiet any longer. He coiled himself up like a wild beast about to spring, and he hurled himself at us, as if to tear us to pieces. Polemarchus and I were frightened and flustered as he roared into our midst. What nonsense have you two been talking, Socrates? I'm sorry, I lost my place. Why do you act like idiots by giving way to one another? If you truly want to know what justice is, don't just ask questions and then refute the answers simply to satisfy your competitiveness or love of honor. You know very well that it is easier to ask questions than to answer them. Give an answer yourself and tell us what you say the just is. And don't tell me that it's the right, the beneficial, the profitable, the gainful, or the advantageous, but tell me clearly and exactly what you mean, for I won't accept such nonsense from you. His words startled me, and looking at him, I was afraid. And I think that if I hadn't seen him before he stared at me, I'd have been dumbstruck. But he goes on to say, well, you know, we're trying. We don't really know the answer, first of all, Thrasymachus. But he said, on the next page, in paragraph B, you're a clever fellow, Thrasymachus. You knew very well that if you ask someone how much 12 is, and as you ask, you warn him by saying, don't tell me, man, that 12 is twice 6, or 3 times 4, or 6 times 2, or 4 times 3, for I won't accept any such nonsense. Because that's what he told him. He said, don't tell me it's beneficial, the game. Don't tell me that. He said, that's how you're treating us. So Thrasymachus has an answer. What is justice? And may I just interject here before somebody answers that question for me? If you read the footnotes, it told you about who the people are who are present here. Glaucon and Adeimantus are Plato's brothers. The Plato, his brothers, his literal, actual, historical brothers. 2 of the guys. Thrasymachus is a sophist. He is one of the paid people who tell you how to make things sound good. Oh, he was. So what does Thrasymachus say justice is? Yeah, Hannah. The advantage of the stronger. He says this. Bottom of page 14. Where it says, don't you know? Very, very bottom of page 14. Don't you know that some cities are ruled by a tyranny, some by a democracy, and some by an aristocracy? Of course. And in each city, this element is stronger, namely the ruler, certainly, and each makes laws to its own advantage. Democracy makes democratic laws, tyranny makes tyrannical laws, and so on with the others. And they declare what they have made, what is to their own advantage, to be just for their subjects, and they punish anyone who goes against it as lawless and unjust. This then is what I say justice is, the same in all cities, the advantage of the established rule. I get power, and I make rules, and then I make rules that will help me because I'm in power, and I tell all of you, you should do all this because that's justice.
So justice is relative.
Justice is relative as far as Thrasymachus is concerned. But the only thing unchangeable and objective about it is whoever's in charge gets to make the rules. So you're all familiar with the golden rule, obviously, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But there's a joke on the golden rule. They say the golden rule is whoever has the gold makes the rules. That's Thrasymachus. Whoever has the gold makes the rules, right? Whoever is stronger. Okay, you can imagine Socrates is not real fond of this. And he says, well, I turned away from the page just a second. Okay, this is still page 14. Paragraph C, but the next paragraph below that. I must first understand you, for I don't yet know what you mean. The advantage of the stronger, you say, is just? What do you mean, Thrasymachus? Surely you don't mean something like this. Polydamas the pancratist, he's a wrestler, is stronger than we are. It is to his advantage to eat beef to build up his physical strength. Therefore, this food also is advantageous and just for us, who are weaker than he is? I love this answer. You disgust me, Socrates. Your trick is to take hold of the argument at the point where you can do it the most harm. Of course, this is what Thrasymachus makes money doing. Taking an argument and attacking it where he can do the most harm. It's a little ironic. So they go, I'm not going to trace every single argument in this. I mean, you guys are not illiterate, right? We've established that. And you can follow the arguments, but pop up to page 19. Socrates shows Thrasymachus, step by step, that all the crafts, all the arts that people practice, and by arts, he means anything that takes a skill, right? It does it to make the thing it's working on better. So if you're a cobbler, your idea is to make the best shoes possible. If you're a doctor, it's to promote the health of your patient. You make whoever the object of your craft is better. And ruling is a craft. And therefore rulers must act to make those they're ruled better, not themselves. It follows the logical argument. This is Thrasymachus's answer. Down page 19, right below the number 343 in the margin. Instead of answering, Thrasymachus said, "Tell me, Socrates, do you still have a wet nurse? Are you a toddler? What's this? Hadn't you better answer my questions rather than asking me such things? 'Cause she's letting you run around with a snotty nose and doesn't wipe it when she needs to. Why, for all she cares, you don't even know about sheep and shepherds. Hey, Socrates, why do you think those shepherds take care of the sheep? Dinner and clothes. That's what they want from sheep. They're going to roast them and season them, or they're going to shear them and use them for the wool. They don't do it for the good of the sheep. They do it for the good of themselves. Rulers are like shepherds in the worst sense. You know, to use what they can get from the object of their care." He is annoying. Oh, by the way, this just popped into my head. I was going to say it at the beginning. I'm sorry to be desultory here. So, Ethan, last week you said, "Why isn't knowledge free?" And I just thought about this all week. Why isn't knowledge free? Why do we pay teachers? And so, I'm speculating on this. And I have, this is my foray in towards truth, but I don't know that I'm there yet. But no, this is not worth writing down. I'm telling you, nothing I say is worth writing down. That I was thinking about, there's another group of people that offer something that is free to you, but yet they guide you in it, and that would be pastors of churches. God's forgiveness and grace is free, but yet we pay pastors. Paul says in the New Testament that the worker is worth his hire, that that it is legitimate to make your living spreading the gospel, and so they are caring for that flock and leading them into a truth that is free and available to all, but yet we pay them for it. Yeah, lay it on me.
And then I would argue because God says we don't church, that's tithing. And why we tithe? Tithing is basically giving
Okay.
to the church, and that's the thing for us. And we give donations, but that's out of our own, allowance, out of our own like goodwill for the church. But
This is true. The church doesn't say you owe $79.50 this month, or you know what I mean. Okay, that's a good point.
and education should in a sense be free, a certain amount, to like any medical school, of course, things of that should be necessarily free, because those are things that will lead to more important goals for a like doctoral.
Yes. Perhaps we could say education is free. It's called a library. It's called a public library. But then we hire someone to guide us through it, perhaps. Anyway, I thought about that for a while. Why is that not? Yes, Kyle.
So, as you're saying, a guide is, a teacher is God.
Yes.
They let you work home to learn it all. They're like any questions that you can guide you along with. And, as doctor school, if you don't know information, you can't be guided, you can't pass. So it's more you're learning and they're guiding than more than they're teaching and you're learning.
So it might be like visiting a museum or a public, a national park, and except the museum you had to charge admission. It's a free museum or a free national park. Okay, we're gonna change that. And so you could go wander around and view all the sites and see everything on your own. But if you would like to hire a guide to enrich your experience by showing you more of the things, maybe that's a better analogy. Thank you. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let's go back to Thrasymachus. We'll go to page 25. Thrasymachus makes a very telling comment, I feel like, on page 25. Well, let's start with 24, okay? Because Socrates is saying, I really want to understand what you're saying about justice and injustice, Thrasymachus. Do you really believe that unjust people are better off? Do you really believe it? And about halfway through page 24, it says, that is to say, okay, between the C and the D, that is to say, you call justice a virtue and injustice a vice? Thrasymachus says, that's hardly likely, since I say that injustice is profitable and justice isn't. Then what exactly do you say? The opposite. That justice is a vice? No, just very high-minded simplicity. Then do you call being unjust being low-minded? No, call it good judgment.
Saying that technically the unjust are better off, that could be him questioning God. Because he's like, wait a minute, if unjust people are better off, then why did God do this?
But then I come back to you, Ethan, and I say, look how the gods treat each other. There's injustice even on Mount Olympus. Hephaestus gets, tossed out of Olympus, and
Just
they...
because he doesn't miss the best
Doesn't have the best life. In some stories, the fall is what gave him the cripple, and then some versions he's crippled before. They're very confused about the versions. That's why you just try. You just go with it. You just relax and go with it in Greek mythology. But yes. So at the top of page 25, Socrates says, nonetheless, we mustn't shrink from pursuing the argument and looking into this, just as long as I take you to be saying what you really think. And I believe that you aren't joking, Thrasymachus, but are saying what you believe to be the truth. Listen to his answer. What difference does it make to you whether I believe it or not? It's my account you're supposed to be refuting. This is the sophist talking. What does it matter? I'll argue anything. What's it matter to you whether I believe it? We're not talking about me. We're just talking about my words. And Socrates is like, we're talking about your soul. We're talking about how to live the best life possible. And if you don't know, if injustice really is the best life possible, we need to find out that it's true. And if justice is the best life possible, by golly, we better work on being just people. I care about how you live. Someone says, yeah, it's just words. It doesn't really matter whether I believe it or not. He is. On reality for him. Whether he believes this or not, he thinks is irrelevant. And of course, this is why Socrates is spending his whole life doing what he's doing. He thinks it is highly relevant. And this is why I would argue we are holding this book today. You know, that we have most of what Plato read. All the things that are lost, all those Greek plays, you know, and he wrote 70-some plays, 80-some plays, and we have 8, and we have 7. They're all lost. But people saved this, apparently because people over the ages have found it relevant to find out, what does it mean to be a just person? What is justice? Because I need to know, because it matters how I live my life. There's an interesting book called How to Read a Book, and some of you might be familiar with it, by Mortimer Adler. And it is, I know, it's kind of a joke, because you're like, well, I know how to read because I'm reading a book, because it's called How to Read. Okay, it's how to read a book well. It's how to dig in. And one of the things Adler argues in this book is that if you read something, and this is more nonfiction, but it could apply to truths illuminated by fiction, okay? If you read something and you understand it, you understand the argument, you understand what the author is saying, and you believe it is true, if it doesn't change how you behave, you don't really believe it's true. Example. There's a book called Fat Chance, and it's about how bad refined sugar is for your system, how bad it is for your hormones and everything. I read this book. I understand the arguments, and I say I believe it. But this does not really matter, you know. I mean, okay, I do moderate my sugar consumption, but you know, but when it's there in front of me, I don't think, oh, Dr. Lustig said in Fat Chance that all these things are going to happen inside me if I overconsume refined sugar. I'm like, no, give me the big piece. That's what I say. All right, so arguably, I don't believe it in the fullest sense. Do you know what I mean? Like that I'm committing myself to this truth. I'm not all in, right? And so Thrasymachus doesn't care about that. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're just arguing over words. There's no truth for him to be all in on. Does that make sense? Yeah. It was a very convoluted story. I feel like we came back to the right place eventually. Socrates goes on. I'm going to skip over the rest of this book, I think. Talking about injustice, except I want to attack that last question, I guess. They come upon an argument. Thrasymachus is trying to say that unjust people are just stronger. Because maybe they have more options available to them too. You know, if cheating isn't an option and lying isn't an option and you know, committing acts of injustice isn't, then it's limiting. And on page 28, we hear Socrates, and this was the last question I asked you. How does Socrates argue that injustice is weaker than justice? Yeah, Lauren. Okay, so if we are now a gang. Welcome to the gang. I don't know what we do. We rob banks. We're a bank robber gang. That sounds fun. That's kind of exotic, you know. But the thing is, we keep cheating each other. Like every time we go out for a job, I just feel like Carl has more than everybody else. Carl keeps buying new stuff. It's like, what's the deal? I don't think that things are being divided up correctly. And so we get into an argument. Are we going to go out there and rob our next bank, you know, with camaraderie and happiness, working together. No, we're all going to be watching Carl to see if he pockets a few extra, pockets of those bound packets of bills, from the bank. And we're going to, and then the police show up and we're all dead or in prison. Boom. It ruined our internal dissension, just ruined the game. Socrates is like, that's what injustice does. When people are unjust to each other in a society, they start fighting, and then they can't work together. And if a person is unjust, he's got like a little civil war going on inside his own heart, inside his own soul. Presumably, unless, I guess, here I'm going to be Thrasymachus now. But not if you're completely unjust, Socrates, and there's no conscience, there's no civil war. I'm just totally black-hearted, unjust. I have no conscience, and there's no civil war. Let's not go there. Let's not make that choice, all right? So injustice seems to be weaker in that regard because it weakens whatever it's in the presence of. But finally, we get to the end of book one, basically with nothing accomplished. Socrates says at the very end, on page 31, that he's been like a glutton, just picking at this argument and that argument and not really following one. And he says, hence, the result of the discussion, as far as I'm concerned, is that I know nothing. We started out trying to find out what justice was, and then we started talking about whether justice was stronger than injustice. And then we went here and there, and we left the argument. We didn't follow it. I don't know. I have no answer. So that takes us into book 2. So Glaucon, Plato's brother, Plato's historical actual brother, who's here, says, Socrates, I've often heard people like Thrasymachus, and they run around and they make fancy arguments. These sophists can argue anything. But often I hear justice praised because it brings you things. For example, if a person is known to be a good person, how do other people treat that person? They're just a good person. Okay, so what might you get out of that? Praise, honor. Maybe you might be for the unjust. But in general, at least in public, people want to be seen honoring a good person. Maybe you'll give them positions of authority because they have a reputation for being good. So Glaucon says, kind of makes you wonder then, are they just only because they want the perks that come with it? Or are they just because it's right? And this applies to us too in our society, even as Christians, right? I mean, we can do things out of obedience to God, but the perks may come with that. And I'm not saying go home and examine your heart every time you do anything to make sure you're not doing it for any of the perks. Jesus offers us perks. The kingdom. In my house are many mansions. I'm going to prepare a place for you. He didn't say just grit your teeth and obey and bear it. Like there's reward. Apparently it's not a bad thing. But Glaucon says that's not how I want to hear it described. I want to know what's good about justice itself, not the perks you might get from it. And he says, here's what I want to do, Socrates. And this is on page, 34. He says in the paragraph that has a C, kind of right next to that letter C. First, I'll state what kind of thing people consider justice to be and what its origins are. Second, I'll argue that all who practice it do it unwillingly. Nobody's just willingly. They're forced to be just. And third, I'll argue they have a good reason to act as they do, for the life of an unjust person is, they say, much better than that of a just one. Okay, so Glaucon says, I don't really believe this, Socrates. I'm not like Thrasymachus, where it doesn't really matter. I'm giving you the opposite side, and I'm going to make my best case for the opposite side. Then you prove me wrong, Socrates, so that I will know in my heart that justice really is stronger and better. Does that make sense? That's Glaucon's plan. So first of all, Yes.
Devil's advocate for that.
Exactly, exactly. And I'm going to give it my best shot so that you can see what people say, people like Thrasymachus, and that you can answer all the arguments. And so first, he does the first, down at the bottom of that same page, the very last paragraph. They say that to do injustice is naturally good, and to suffer injustice is bad. But that the badness of suffering it so far exceeds the goodness of doing it, that those who have done and suffered injustice and tasted both, but who lack the power to do it and avoid suffering it, decide it is profitable to come to an agreement with each other to neither do injustice nor to suffer it. All right, I'm a weakling. I hate people being unjust to me. I don't have the power to be unjust to you, but you can be unjust to me. And I say, I'm sick and tired of being taken advantage of. Hey, Ethan, let's come to an agreement. We're just going to call justice good. We're going to say justice is a good thing. I really only want to do it so he won't, cheat me in some way, be unjust to me in some way. So he says, that's what they say, Socrates. They say that justice is just a concept imposed on other people by the people who don't want to be on the short end. That's all it is. I convince the stronger people that justice is a good thing just so you'll leave me alone. That's what they say, Socrates. That's what they say justice comes from. And then the second one, he says he was going to show that everybody who is just does it unwillingly. They're just forced to be just. And we get the story of the ring of Gyges. What is the point of the story, the magic ring of Gyges? Yeah, Matthew.
People commit justice if they think they will be.
What if there were a magic ring that made you invisible? Kind of like the ring, Makes you invisible, and then you can do it. And no one will ever know it was you. Glaucon says, people would do it. I can go rob the bank. I don't need the gang anymore. I can just go I don't need any of you anymore. I'll rob my own banks. And no one will ever catch me. I can go in, I can cavort with other people's spouses. They'll never know. But if you're invisible, that would be kind of creepy for the spouse. That's one of the examples he uses. Like, I can sleep with whoever I want. It's like, well, you're invisible? I could do anything I wanted, and no one would know it was me. And Glaucon says, most people think that the majority of people would just do it. They would go for it if they thought no one would ever know and no one could see. Which proves that the only reason we're just is because we're afraid we're going to get caught if we're not. Not because we think justice is good. So remember, Glaucon is arguing the other side. Glaucon's not saying what he believes or what he thinks is true. This is certainly not what Plato wants us to believe. Glaucon's arguing the other side. So, magic ring of Gyges. Would you do it if you could do it? And do it with impunity. Now, we got, yes. Oh, like infrared and, I thought you were going to say God sees everything. Does that too. Carson said, we have something who sees everything. He's like, God, no, it's infrared detection and night vision goggles, and that too, we do. And number 3, he says he's going to argue that unjust people have a better life. All right? And he says on page 36, actually, this is kind of long. Well, I'm going to read parts of it, okay? Let's read the whole thing. Why not? Letter E on page 36. As for the choice between the lives we're discussing, we'll be able to make a correct judgment about that only if we separate the most just and the most unjust to see who has a better life. Otherwise, we won't be able to do it. Here's the separation I have in mind. will subtract nothing from the injustice of an unjust person and nothing from the justice of a just one, but will take each to be complete in his own way of life. The hypothetical unjust person is as thoroughly unjust as you can possibly be.
No justice.
No justice at all. And our sample just person is thoroughly just. There's not a whiff of injustice in this person, okay? And then skipping down in that paragraph a little bit, actually, let's go over to page 37, okay. Having hypothesized such a person, let's now in our argument put him beside a just man. There's the unjust and the just, who is simple and noble, who, as Aeschylus says, doesn't want to be believed to be good, but to be so. Okay? So, the part I skipped over, I guess I should have read the whole thing. In the part I skipped over, the sample unjust person, the thoroughly unjust person, part of the thorough unjustness is everyone thinks they're just. Because that's unjust too. You see, to give people the wrong impression of you. Everybody thinks he's totally just. All the injustice, the thorough injustice is hidden. So he gets all the honors that good people get. And this makes him the most thoroughly unjust, because he's unjust even in the impressions he gives other people. He's a total cheat. Everybody loves him. They give him all those perks we were talking about. They honor him. They give him the best seat, you know, when he goes to the movies. They give him the biggest piece of pie at the banquet. Now, top of page 37. Let's put him next to the just person. We must take away his reputation, for a reputation for justice would bring him honor and rewards, so that it wouldn't be clear whether he is just for the sake of justice itself or for the sake of these honors and rewards. We must strip him of everything except justice and make his situation the opposite of an unjust person's. Though he does no injustice, he must have the greatest reputation for it, so that his justice may be tested full strength and not diluted by wrongdoing and what comes from it. Let him stay like that unchanged until he dies. Just, but all his life believed to be unjust. Skip down to the next paragraph. All right. They'll say, this is just below the E, they'll say that a just person in such circumstances will be whipped, stretched on a rack, chained, blinded with fire, and at the end, when he has suffered every kind of evil, he'll be impaled, and will realize that one shouldn't want to be just, but to be believed to be just. Because the justice didn't do this guy any good at all. So at the end of his little parable, if you will, we have the thoroughly unjust man who is believed to be just. That's part of his injustice, his cheating image. And everybody loves him. He gets everything he wants. And then we have the thoroughly just man from whom everything but justice has been stripped. And everyone believes him to be the opposite. And he ends up tortured and dead. Now, Socrates, you tell me I'm wrong. Please tell me that's not what justice and injustice are like. Please defend justice, because I've just made the best possible case against it. And it's a pretty strong case. Pretty heavy.
Really the only
I need a drink.
we have on earth just in that case is because we know that God is good, and that unjust person who either be good in this life, we're not going to go somewhere good.
Yes. Okay.
If we are to believe that God is real and that science is real, and that evolution is the means of how we live or how we reward, then why are we why? Oh, we don't need to be. It's all relative. It's all the word good people. How do you define good? How? Why do we have to be good people if there's no God?
We don't.
You can't
We
question
don't.
it. You don't have to.
And even if we did have to, who would create what is just?
It's exactly.
Ethics create what is just.
Remember,
Who creates ethics?
Who creates ethics?
Euthyphro.
People.
Does God love it because it is pious? Or is it pious because God loves it? Is there a standard outside of God, in other words, that is creating what's good?
So long as it doesn't interfere with my truth, you can do whatever you want.
By that standard, if people made justice, and I make my own justice, my justice is making sure you don't make your own justice.
That's called slavery. And my own truth is that.
I'm not a
that
slave
I'm
anymore.
going to,
My justice is that I'm free from my
I'm
own
going to go
slavery.
ahead and get a bunch of people. That's my truth. I'm going to keep that money. That's my truth.
And
Why is it just?
yes, how would that? Okay, everybody, let's be quiet. So Gabby says, what about an atheist who's trying to cure cancer, which is a good thing, that you're doing a good thing. So, all right, he would have no basis, but my question is not so much that as then what's the motivation for curing cancer? See, what if glaucon, or thrasymachus for that matter, might matter? Well, he didn't do it because it was a good thing. He did it because there's money and honor attached to being the person who cures cancer, and you get to go in the history. I'm not saying that's necessarily this person's motive. I think that it's very hard to be an atheist because we have a natural, I don't think that thoroughly unjust person exists. Do you see what I mean? I think that, and that's the philosophical problem of atheism, isn't it? But you want to do good to other people sometimes, but you've got no basis for doing it. But if I were Glaucon making my argument, or if Thrasymachus really making my argument, may I say, well, that doctor just wants the perks. He doesn't want to just help people. He wants the honors. I'm going to go down in the history books. I don't know. But yes, atheists do objectively good things from our point of view, but hard to know the soul. I'm not saying every atheist doctor is trying for glory. Yes.
So, my understanding of it is that if I'm an atheist, if there's no moral justice, I believe cancer is just.
This is true.
I believe film is just. It can be wrong. It can be wrong.
But I think that back to Plato. Let's come back to Plato though, Kyle, because they are not arguing there are no gods. All right. Oh, well, Thrasymachus might. Thrasymachus might go there. But it is a hard problem. And I guess this takes us back to what Glaucon wants. Glaucon really wants to know that it's not because a god told you that justice was just and injustice was injustice. I want to know that it is proper and right and good and healthy for a human being to be just in and of itself. Just like eating certain foods is just proper and right and good for our bodies, and eating some other ones aren't. No rewards attached in this life or the next. That's what I want to know. How is justice just plain good for us? Yes, Ethan. Probably. So can we revisit that comment after we finish the book? And then we'll see if you think they have answered it to your satisfaction, or you say, yeah, no, it's still impossible to answer. This is the thing. Notice that in Euthyphro, they never came to an agreement about what the pious was. Euthyphro took off. Many Platonic dialogues are like this. Because remember, Socrates never claims to be there. And in that, I feel like, in that sense, he is a good model for our Christian sanctification. We will never know all truth. completely, ever, for eternity, because then we'd be God. We will always, I think, this is my theory, always be learning new truths and depths of God and reality for eternity. We will never have it exhausted, because then we'd be God. And so, if so, then we're always moving towards a fuller understanding of truth, right? And I feel like that's what Socrates is doing. Like, he never ends these saying, okay, great, let's go home, we got it. We pinned justice to the wall, we got piety down. He more often leaves saying, yeah, hopefully we're closer to an understanding now than we were before, but I don't think we have it fully grasped yet. And that's hard. For me, personally, I like to know things. I just really want to know. And it makes me angry and frustrated to not know. Okay, Kyle, what did you want to say?
About the definition of what Plato said.
Mm.
What's there?
Yeah, yeah.
Is there a way these days they're not just working and not run away and just stop with Plato?
Kyle, I don't think the conversations ever happened. These are real historical people in these conversations, but I think Plato invented all of these conversations to show us, first of all, how Socrates operated. Like, I think that's real. His manner, his style, of asking questions. But I don't think that I think that he just used these as parables or analogies or examples to bring to light something. Does that make sense? Because that could have been an option, like it was the rest was unfinished. So let's move on. Okay, so they decide to build a city. Why do they want to do that? Just because it's fun? Okay, we're looking for justice in the city. Did you say something else, Matthew?
So they can more easily find what justice is. They hope they can figure out justice on a small scale so they can see what it is on a personal scale. Large scale
Yes.
so they can see what it is.
We're going to look at a big thing and then see where justice is, how justice plays out. Then we can extrapolate from that to look in the human soul and see if we can find justice there. So how do communities start? How do they start bringing people together for their city? Yeah, Matthew?
No one is self-sufficient, so people come together as partners.
Yeah. So he said, okay, so the rest of this book, we're going to imagine, well, not the whole rest of it, but many, many books, many pages to come. We're building an imaginary city. And always keep in mind, we are building an imaginary city. Plato never implies, I think this is the best possible city and we should build one. And we should govern it this way. Okay. It's like it's hypothetical. But the goal is not building a city, it's to look for justice. So just keep it, because it's easy to get lost in the details, you know what I mean, and forget why we're doing this. But exactly. So in our hypothetical city, how does cities start? Well, you're a farmer and you're a blacksmith and you're a tailor and you're a weaver and I don't do any of those things. But I'm a doctor. So when you all get sick, I can help you, but you can, weave and sew the clothing that I wear, and you can make the tools I need, and you can grow the food, and we'll all help each other. But this is the way a society arises. But very quickly in this imaginary society, I noticed that the people in the city start wanting stuff they don't have, that their neighbors have. Or maybe their neighbors want stuff they have. And they start fighting. They start wars. And they agree that this is how wars generally arise. You have something I want, and I'm going to come in and take it. And likewise, I have something you want, and I better guard against you. So he says, our city's going to need a class of people known as our guardians. They're our warriors. They're our warrior class. And they agreed along the line that it just works better if everyone devotes himself to the thing he's best at. If Carson is a farmer, but he's got to do all the blacksmithing and the weaving and everything. You don't have time to farm. But you've got a green thumb. I mean, it just grows. You just look at it and it grows. You're great. All right? So let's let him do what he's best at. And each of us will just do one thing. So our guardians are going to need to be full-time. Right? They're our standing army. Does that make sense? And then they get to talking about, well, how do we want to raise these guardians? Well, and this is the last thing I asked you on this page. What sort of stories will they tell their young guardians as they're growing up? What should they hear? Hey, what? Say again? Fairy tales, imaginative stories, but stories not including certain elements. Matthew, what do we not want to tell them?
All stories that spread vices and ideas that are not true, like God created you.
Yeah. And all sorts of other things, like when a story gives, this is on page 53, middle of the page, E. When a story gives a bad image of what the gods and heroes are like, we're going to object to that. We don't want stories where gods and goddesses fight with each other over apples. Or they go on battlefields and they get stabbed. Homer is out. Homer and Hesiod are now out of our city. We can't have stories like that. We want to censor, and censor gets a very bad rap today. We need to censor what goes into the brains of our guardians, because if they think the gods behave that way, they'll think it's okay for them to behave that way with dissension and civil war. We don't want that. Yes?
How do guardians, but like not know what their guardians is from?
He doesn't mean that they can't know about other countries and what's going on in current events, but he does. Yeah. So when stories reflect badly on the gods, those are out, because it makes them impious. If stories tell you about the horrors of Hades, and he quotes. Did you notice all the quotes from the Iliad and the Odyssey? How he goes in the Odyssey and Achilles says, I'd rather, be a servant than rule over all the dead in Hades, because it really stinks in Hades. It's like, oh, we can't tell him that, because it'll make him afraid to die. We can't have guardians afraid to die, because they might need to die. We are going to carefully censor all the stories, and these we need to tell them, it's page 59, a God then is simple and true in word and deed. That's what we need to tell them. I'm hoping we'll have some time. Let's go through book 3, but I want to mention this again, because book 3, he launches into, not disparaging Hades, and he launches into music and art. And he spends a long time on music. Did you notice this? Is the air conditioning on? Does it feel cold? Like, is there no in between? Is it not either? It has to be heat or air conditioning? Oh, yeah, see, I rage against the cold, but he goes up and looks at the thermostat because he is smarter than I am. I just sit here and complain. I don't try to change anything, I just complain. This is controversial. People like to argue about this. Plato, very many pages he spends on different sorts of rhythmic meters in poetry and music, and that some of them are not suitable for our guardians, because certain kinds of music will make you, I don't know, lazy and soft, and certain kinds stir you to violence. Now, we accept a world where most of us listen to the same sort of music. Not all of us, but most of us don't listen to classical music on a regular basis. Good for you. But a lot of us, including me, were raised on Casey Kasem's Top 40, which means nothing to you now. You know, like the top 40 hits. Ryan Seacrest does it now? Okay, whatever. Whatever. 1840. All right. Casey Kasem's dead. You can't do it anymore. But when I was growing up, those are the kinds of music I listened to. And so you guys are familiar with Andrew Pudawa, probably, the guy who started IEW. And he is actually a Suzuki music teacher. He was a violin teacher and studied under Mr. Suzuki in Japan for 3 years. And he talks a lot about the effects of music on our bodies, on our minds, on our spirits. And like it or not, there are now scientific studies to show that certain kinds of music affect our behavior and they affect our thinking processes in our brains. And rock music, not so good. Not so good. And I'm not talking about screaming heavy metal. I'm talking about Billy Joel. I'm talking about Elvis. I'm talking about the Beatles. Okay, I'm not talking about anything, and it has nothing to do with the moral quality of the lyrics. If that is true, and I can't defend. I mean, I'm just. They study people under lab conditions, and it affects the brain waves, you know, of the being. Andrew Pudawa has kids write about a study, like the little kids when they're practicing the early units. There's a study where they did it with plants. You know, played music for different kinds of plants, and the plants are affected by different kinds of music. Creepily, yes.
Cows will produce more milk if you have music.
Yes, our neighbor has sheep, and he plays music out there. My uncle used to play music for the pigs. I think they just liked it because he wasn't milking the pigs. So if that is true, and that's an if, all right, I'm not dogmatically pronouncing to you, then it means that we can't just switch the secular lyrics out for Christian lyrics and say now we have a good song. If the type of music itself at core is rotten, contemporary Christian music is also not healthy. It wouldn't matter whether or not the lyrics were Christian if the music is problematic. It's an if, all right? It's an if. Now, I'm not saying you have to go home and burn all your CDs, and I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. But I'm putting us in the mindset of Socrates because the Greeks really believed. They really legitimately believed that music, that's why all their children had training in music. And what we would call music theory, not as advanced music theory as we have today, but the idea of the different rhythms and tones and things. Because they believed that our souls and bodies had a harmony. And that what we were surrounded with, you know, enhanced the harmony of us or it caused disharmony. And so, you know, when rock and roll music started, you know, those rhythms, people are like, oh, it's wicked and it encourages vice and everything. That godless music and, you know, Footloose or whatever you want to go. But what if there is an element of truth in that? The Greeks would say there is. That certain types of music affect us in certain ways. We do know that music affects our mood tremendously. We all know this. So, you know, I can be feeling bleh, and I drive into class and you know, a fun song comes on. I've got, you know, a playlist on my plastic, whatever, I stick it in the car. And then it's, this morning I heard The Lion Sleeps Tonight by the Tokens played. It's just like hard to be sad and sing as hard as you can because there's nobody else in the car and you're not gonna, you know, to do the thing, whee, you know, and you're doing it as loud and your throat hurts, but you're like, oh, well, I'm happy. And it's because it's fun. It lifts you. And so no, it's not necessarily the lyrics. It's just some sounds I love the way they sound. It just makes me happy. I love that moment in the song. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes it's the instrumental interlude or whatever. It's like, oh, I love that piano part. You know, Blue. Do you guys know the song Blue? I'm Blue, you know? Okay, love it, because I love to listen to the piano in the background, you know? Like I just focus on it, it's like, oh, I love that part. And the little, like it sounds like Star Wars gunshots. Anyway, I'm sorry. See, now you notice what kind of music I listen to, okay? I don't know that it's healthy for me, but it does make me happy. And so Socrates says we need to watch the training of these guardians because we want to harmonize their beings. And here's why. So, this is my last, we'll blow through the last couple of questions really fast. But this is going to come back up later in this book, and so I want to kind of give you an example of this. So Socrates, or the Greeks, not just Socrates, the Greeks picture us as three parts, okay? We've got a head, and they didn't know about everything about brainwaves and everything, but they had the idea of the mind, the head. This is the rational part of me. This is the part that rules if I'm on the ball and tells me what I should do and what is a good choice, okay? Then there's this, the belly. This is my appetites, and not just appetite for food, okay? Any physical desire or pleasure. I just want it. I feel like ice cream. I just want it. I just want ice cream today, all right? But my brain says, Michelle, this is Lent, your Lenten season, and you're not having dairy during Lenten season. All right, so it says, no, you don't get ice cream today. You get ice cream till May. And it's hard, that battle. So they said, you have the chest, all right? The chest is what they call the spirited part of you. It's the part that is courageous and long-suffering and virtuous, and you know those things that you can't really think yourself into? You have to feel yourself in, you know what I mean? And it monitors, all right? It keeps like your brain and your belly in order. So here's how it's working for me. I want ice cream. It is Lent. And then the chest says, and you know what that means. You are practicing discipline so that you can tell your body, this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're not going to do. Because someday God might ask you to do some really hard thing for him. And if I haven't practiced telling myself no in little things, how will I be able to do the big things? I need to practice discipline. And I need to tell my belly who's in charge. And there's a bigger reason I'm doing it. Not just because the church told me to. It's because I want to learn to be in charge of my appetites. Because that's right, and because someday I may be called to something much bigger than saying no to ice cream. And I want to be ready for the challenge. Does that make sense? So I've got this mediator here, and so this is what they believed, how we were laid out. And Socrates is saying, you know, those bad kinds of poetry and music, they weaken this in our guardians. So either they're going to be all like minds, and they're going to be all like lazy and just contemplative, and they're just going to think all the time, or they're going to become savage. We need to encourage this part in them. I know this is kind of weird sounding, but does it sort of make sense? Okay, so C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Abolition of Man. It's a great book. It's about education, about modern education. And he refers to modern educators who give kids, I guess Socrates and C.S. Lewis would say, the wrong sorts of stories, that teach them that there's no real right or wrong. He said, he calls them men without chests. It creates, either they're all thinking, but it's kind of disconnected from reality, or they just follow their desires, they follow their appetites, their instincts. That's all they know. And there's no mediator. And he said, that's what schools are doing to children. They're producing men without chests, without the courage, perseverance, tenacity, all those things that fairy tales, when we tell them to kids, that's what we want them to get out of it. All right? Look at the hero. Look at Jack. He climbs the beanstalk and he fights the giant. G.K. Chesterton said that dragons aren't in stories to teach children that they exist. It's to teach them that they can be beaten. The dragon can be beaten. All right, I'm sorry. Get all excited. And my brain doesn't tell my spirited part to stop. Okay, why does Socrates think it's shameful to have so many doctors and lawyers? Let's just go through these real quick. Yeah, Matthew.
Many doctors implies a sickly population, and a sickly population is not what we want.
Yeah, he said, you know what? If you have a lot of lawyers, it means apparently you can't take care of your business by yourself and get along. And you have lots of doctors for ailments that you bring on yourself because you don't believe Dr. Lustig in the book Fat Chance and you eat lots of sugar. That's kind of shameful. Think of all the ailments that Americans suffer from that we bring on ourselves. Obesity, diabetes, is type 2, gout, heart failure in many cases, yes.
I heard it's like, I was listening to something the other day, it's like, we think of like medicine nowadays as like something you can give, like a fix or something. Like you usually think like a pill or something like that, when like Hippocrates says medicine isn't like, okay, I'm sick, take care of me, it's what can I do now? It's
Yes.
preventing.
He said, let food be your medicine. Right? And I'm not saying go crazy out the deep end and don't eat your birthday cake. You know what I mean? Everything in moderation, but so he said that's shameful. That would be shameful. So, but the next question, so physical training and intellectual training, what are they both really for? Yeah. The soul. Socrates says we need them to work out. It's not just so they'll be bodybuilders. It's because they'll be harmonized. Because you know what? We have bodies. As Christians, we know we are integrally part of our bodies. Our bodies are us, we're one. For Plato, not so much. It's like I'm stuck in a body for the time being. But either way, I got a body. But I don't need it to be super strong. I need it to be in harmony with my soul. Okay, and the last one was what happens to a person, I guess we've talked about this, who concentrates only on physical training? What happens to you, Matthew? Yeah, you turn them into, I don't know, like the Terminator or something. They only think of force. They only think of violence. We have to be very careful. Do you notice how they spent a whole book talking about training these guardians?
Are they trying to make perfect human beings pretty much?
Possibly, or you know what, Alex, I would think maybe they don't think there is a definition to perfect human being, the perfect guardian. Because that's different from the perfect farmer, or the perfect blacksmith, or weaver, or tailor, or whatever. That person would be different. What they need would be different. I hope this wasn't horribly boring today. I hope this was kind of interesting. So here's what I want to tweak your assignment a little bit, okay? It's just one little thing. I realized when I set up our reading, last summer, when I made this document, I was going to have you read books 1 through 3, then 4 through 6, then 7, 8, 9, and 10. And so that would make our final reading a little slightly longer. But I'm going to have you read 4, 5, 6, and 7. Could you also read book 7, since we have a 2-week break? And then when we come back, you have a shorter reading, for that 1 week. So it's not going to be as much as you would normally read each week, you know what I mean? But if you would read the next 4 books. So the questions for book 7 are in the following week, all right? You have to go to the following week in your book to look at those. Book 7 contains what is probably the most famous image that Plato ever described. It is the allegory of the cave. Then you're in for a treat. It's going to be awesome. All right, yes.
My brother and his friend at school that can on YouTube essentially did the allegory of the cave, but like in a modern, essentially it's that in a modern sense. It's like they're at the school and the girls are, my brother has been like studying the character and he doesn't want to leave, but the girls went outside like, no, this isn't real. And
Oh, you're going to love it. I hope you love it. Anyway, thank you for your responses and your patience, and we'll all learn to be more just together. All right, is that a paper? Oh, great. Okay, let me turn this off.